see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, this is Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And we're doing sort of a panel approach here. And I have Owen, Marcus, and Ken Solin to talk with today. Thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
And so to give a little bit of background, just in terms of introduction, Owen, you blog about men's issues and also have a website where you and do on the topic of men's issues, as well as do workshops, as I understand. Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe you want to give a little bit of introduction, quick introduction.
Yeah, I've been blogging about men's issues, men's groups for a while, but it really comes out of my experience of working with men for over 25 years. And we just found that, one of my taglines is that as men, we're not bad and broken. We just didn't get to learn what we needed to learn to be, as that we're saying now, that hero that we really are. And so what happens is that you put a group of guys together, and that quality that we never really were able to develop on our own starts to come out. And in the course of doing it all these years, I started training other men to do it, and then out of that, started writing about it.
Mm. And you and Ken, you're going to be doing a workshop. It's called How to Use Micro-Communities to Teach Men Empathy and Other Emotional Skills. So have you been doing workshops as well, Ken?
Yes, and actually the name of this workshop and the name of our program going forward is Manhood 2.0, Be Your Own Hero. Because we're convinced that if a man can become his own hero, then he's done the work that men need to do to actualize their manhood. There's questions a man can ask himself, but in the end, it comes down to living in integrity with himself, to practice emotional honesty with everyone, including women, which seems to be a real problem for men. We're trying to teach men in mythology. The young man always had to slay the dragon in order to win the princess and marry her and live happily ever after. In today's culture, slaying the dragon for most men means giving up their flawed notions of manhood. The idea that real men don't talk about how they feel, real men don't share those things. Real men don't share their feelings with women either. And, that's the dragon. That flawed notion of manhood is the dragon. Mm. We're trying to teach men, actually, you can become your own hero, and the woman's hero, your children's hero, your co-worker's hero, by learning how to live in integrity with yourself as a man. So that's what the Manhood 2.0, Be Your Own Hero, is about. And the first program we're doing is in Sonoma, California, October 26th to 28th. And we've intentionally limited registration to less than 24 men because we want this to be a personal, hands-on, intense experience for each participant.
And so is this the Man's Camp Weekend, the website I have here? I'm just showing it. It's manscampweekends.com.
That's correct.
Yeah, so I'm just showing it on the screen here. Do you want to introduce the website? Maybe say something about the website?
Go ahead, Owen.
The work with men's groups, and particularly we started recently a nonprofit called Mencore, because we really believe that the most powerful work men can do is in these men's groups, or what we're also calling micro-communities. And these regular groups of men start to fill those gaps in our maturation that, for whatever reason, maybe we didn't have the father there to teach us, or he was under stress, we were under stress, and we did not get to learn what we needed to learn growing up as a boy or into our manhood. And so these groups are powerful ways and simple ways, and often really fun ways to get to learn, to experience, and to develop what we really need to have to be that man and to be our own hero. Now, what we found was that as simple as these groups are to start, a lot of men wanted an experience of these groups so they knew what they were getting into. And so they had some at least experiential basis to develop a group. And so out of that, Ken and I decided to offer these 48-hour weekend workshops, as Ken said, in these really beautiful environments with small groups, and teach these men through their own experience the power of being in a group and learn the basic skills that you start to learn in a group and to start to form a group when they leave. And so that's what Men Camp Weekends is about. And this first one in October is our first weekend, and we're really excited to be offering it.
Okay, and it's really about empathy, right? It's about how to foster empathy is kind of one of the basic. I mean, you're talking about slaying the dragon, but I mean, we're talking about empathy too here.
Absolutely. The premise of our workshops and the premise of our work period is that men need to share on an experiential level their emotional experiences without judgment, without opinions, without advice, just to share so they can experience, they can talk about their own experiences in similar situations. That's the empathy. A man who's going through a divorce doesn't need to hear advice. He doesn't need to hear about how he should go about dating. What he needs to hear is from another fellow who's been through a divorce fairly recently even, who can share with him how that felt, how the pain that was involved, how long that lasted, what he did to make himself feel better, what he did that made himself feel worse. That's the kind of information that we're trying to get men to share with each other. But first, men have to get past their fear. I wrote an article about emotional honesty with women in relationships for the Huffington Post a couple of months ago. It got almost 2,500 comments. Half were from women. They all said, yes, God, finally, somebody's saying, what we've been saying forever. The other half were from men who all said I was crazy. Because if you're emotionally honest with a woman, she'll ridicule you, she'll abuse you, or she'll dump you. So I followed that article with another article explaining to men that every one of their reasons, their excuses for not believing in being emotionally honest with women and with everybody was fear-based, and that men don't operate well out of fear. You can't navigate a relationship with men friends, with a woman, or your children, or anybody, your coworkers, or anybody, from a place of fear. So men can help each other face their fears and move through them. And because all men share these fears, the fear of looking wimpy, that's a word that comes up often. Guys write to me and say, it's wimpy to talk about your feelings. And I tell them, it's really wimpy to have a major issue in your life that you're inflicting on your wife, girlfriend, kids, your coworkers, and you're not doing anything about it. That's wimpy. It takes a lot of courage for men to sit down and share with each other, the good and the pain in their lives.
So you're looking at how to foster empathy in that way in terms of sharing and being heard. So you can go and study empathy, learn about the background about it, the science of it, and all that. But what you really want to do is teach the skills and bring men together so they can share and learn the skills together.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we find that often men are encouraged, if maybe not required, to go out and develop these skills because of the women in their life, or primarily maybe their wife. And women will say to men in some ways, you need to get emotional, you need to be empathetic, you need to listen more, you need to hear me. All those emotional intelligence skills, which I think empathy is at the core of. And these guys sort of bristle. In part, why they bristle is the only way that we so often know how to be that way, how to be empathetic, is from a feminine model of emotional intelligence. And one of the things that we teach, a little didactically, but as you're saying, Edwin, mainly experientially, is the skill set around the masculine form of being empathetic. Now, Grant, I think there's probably more similarities than differences between the feminine and the masculine, but there are some differences. And when men can start yeah, seeing that and experiencing it and practicing it and getting feedback in the natural course of being in one of these groups, they quickly develop these skills. So not only do they, develop a proficiency with these men in the group, but as Ken was inferring, that proficiency quickly starts to generalize throughout their life. And so we constantly hear from the men in our groups how their relationships are transforming because of what they're learning in these groups from men. And so their relationships with women are the first time in their life are getting to learn these skills, particularly, in a non-judgmental way.
So you're bringing men together so they can share with each other, and they're not being judged, and they can be heard for what's going on in their lives, and kind of learn that process of maybe opening up and sharing and being heard.
Right. The rules are fairly
Right. And
simple. We like to keep the rules at a minimum because, men don't like rules, and I don't think this work requires a lot of rules. But the few guidelines, I guess I prefer to call them, is everybody leaves his ego at the door because any conversation that comes from a guy's ego is meaningless, useless, and all it becomes is one-upmanship. So the first thing is to leave his ego at the door. And the second thing is absolutely not to judge. If a guy talks about, Owen and I have always believed that when a man shares his feelings, he's telling his absolute truth. A man's expressed feelings are his absolute truth, and as such can't be judged. I caution women that when they try to engage men in this emotional dialogue, they may not hear what they want to hear. They may not empathize with what he has to say at all because it may affect them adversely. But they're certainly entitled to say how they feel about what he's expressed. But once a woman gets a guy to open up and judges what he shared from his heart, I can promise you that's the last time he's ever going to do that again. Men have somewhat fragile psyches when it comes to opening up, and other men need to understand that too. When I started my group 25 years ago, in the beginning, it was chaos. Men were judging each other, giving advice to each other, yelling at each other. It took some time for us to figure out that none of that was going anywhere. It was just a waste of time. But having said that, the male process, as Owen was referring to, is different from the way women process their emotions. And I called Sam Keene when my group started, about 6 months after it started. He's the fellow who wrote Fire in the Belly, one of the first men's books, and he lives in Sonoma. I said, Sam, my group there's so much anger. It's almost not really, that was the difference. Men, it's okay to be angry. It can actually be a very helpful emotion. It's not something that needs to be suppressed. It's something that needs to be controlled. A man who's angry, who can control his anger, can make his point, and he can be heard, and that's good. That's good stuff, not bad. I can empathize very easily with a man who's angry if he can tell me why he's angry in a somewhat controlled manner.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a Facebook page called the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy and Compassion, and I would say probably about 70%, maybe even more, of the people who have signed up are women. So it's the men is like a small kind of portion. So what do you see as the difference between there? Like, why are men kind of behind on the empathy curve, so to speak?
Well, I think there's several reasons. One reason is that when you look at the evolution of modern men, we talk about, we were all in the tribes. We all lived that primitive life. We all did everything together. We shared everything. For a couple million years, we lived a life like that. And then about 200,000 years ago, we started to, leave the tribe for the farm. And particularly about 200 years ago, when we left the farm for the factory, the guys started being around a lot less, and they were working a lot longer, and they were tired when they came home, and they start, we know the story. And then now, we might not be working in the factories, but we're on the computers. So in this evolution of the last few hundred years, men have disconnected because of society and how work has been organized from the family, from their emotions. And in each subsequent generation, the next generation of boys has less intrinsic modeling of what it is to be masculine, what it is to have masculine emotional intelligence, what it is to have empathy, to be able to express it, be able to receive it. And so over the course of time, women and their emotional intelligence and their way of being has sort of become the default. They have filled in, or that way has filled in many of the gaps. So we in this generation, the last few generations, don't really know it. We don't realize it because we're so used to it. But what we're finding in these groups is that, as men, in a simple way, connect back to some of these primordial instincts and skills, they start to redevelop or rediscover that masculine in them, which is, intricately connected to their hero. And when they start to find that, that masculine emotional intelligence and start expressing it and start seeing it in other men, they start to find not just their passion, but their purpose in life, which is a lot of what drives a man's emotion. And then these other men start to support it, as men can do, and we want to do. And that's one of the other qualities about masculine emotional intelligence, is that we tend to want to support men around these abilities, these skills. And then when that starts to happen, this little community starts to really deepen, and these men start to feel literally more empowered. And the women start to love it, because what's happened in so many relationships, we got studies showing it, we see it in our groups, is men start to check out. And so the woman ends up being more of a quasi-masculine. She ends up doing more of the masculine traits, the skills in the family. And no one really thinks about it. But one of the downsides of it is her masculine qualities start to make her hard, maybe angry. It literally starts to ages them, and it affects their relationship. There's a good little short video on our landing page for this weekend by one of the wives of one of the men in one of my groups, talking about how Eldon, the man being in a group, has completely transformed the marriage.
Yeah,
and he was always a nice guy.
Yeah, I can say that without exception, every woman who I've ever spoken with whose husband or boyfriend was in our group said that their relationship, the quality of their relationship improved. Men started becoming better listeners, for one thing, because we, in our group, we really do insist that men listen to each other, hear each other. Don't start formulating the answer before the guy's finished. Like a politician starts answering the question halfway through. He doesn't really even hear the question. He had an idea what he was going to say when he heard the first three words. We teach men to listen, and that listening quality also becomes a part of their relationships with women. But, and also to answer your question a little further about why 70% of your empathy Facebook page followers are women. I remember back in the 60s, early 60s, when the women's movement began. At that time, every woman in America was in a women's group. Every woman was activated. Granted, they had a lot of issues, some that required legislation, but mostly they came from a culture of talking to each other. When they were little girls, they talked to each other. Little boys compete. They compete for sports. When they get older, they compete for girlfriends in sports. When they get bigger, they compete for jobs, wives, girlfriends, and everything else. So they see men as competition. So the culture of sharing that empathetic dialogue starts with women the time they're little girls. For men, it never starts, and that's the difficulty. I think my guess is, and I think I'm probably pretty close here, probably less than 1% of men are actually in a men's group. But even further, I don't think the percent of men who actually have authentic male friendships is a whole lot bigger. Men are just afraid of other men. You know, they meet another guy. I can always tell men who have issues with men because as soon as you meet them, they don't look you in the eye. You know, they're looking at someplace next to me instead of in my eye. So I try to say, no, I'm right here. It's okay. Look at me. And I can tell they're uncomfortable. And so I try to make them feel comfortable. But men see other men. He's taller. He's better looking. He's got more money. He's got a better looking wife. He's got a better job. You know, he's got nicer kids. He's got a bigger house. Maybe he's got a bigger dick. I mean, that's how guys think. You know, they have to stop seeing men and each other in that light. They have to start seeing each other as the best asset they could possibly have. Because as much as women can certainly be friends, you know, my sweetheart and I are great friends, but what I get from her is not the same as what I get from other men. I need what she has to offer, but I need what men have to offer me too. And so sadly, you know, most men in our culture walk around literally friendless. They have no idea. I do a lot of public speaking, and I usually end the talk by asking a question. The next time your life falls apart, who are you going to call? And all I get is blank stares, you know, because, you know, I say at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you got the worst news of your life, who are you going to call? And for most guys, it's no one. And that's wrong. Guys are hurting themselves something terrible with that. That's definitely wrong. It's unnecessary, but they're going to have to slay their dragon, which is the fear of looking unmanly by starting to talk with other men on an emotional basis. It's that slaying the dragon. It hasn't changed. It was true in medieval times, and it's true today. But the dragon is living inside each guy, so he just has to reach inside and yank that dragon out and stomp it. You know.
And he can't. I wouldn't say he can't, but it's very difficult to do it himself. And at some point, if he's really going to develop any mastery with it, he needs to do it with other men. Yes. Because a guy can bullshit himself, and he can at least think he's bullshitting women. But you put him in a group of guys, they will call him out. And we all, you know, and I'm as guilty as any other guy. You know, we have our blind spots. And these guys in the group, in their loving, powerful way, will call us on our blind spots. Because we say to them, look, you know, I want my hero to be a hero. I want to be that man I want to be. And I want your help. And so when I start to veer, you know, tell me. And what the other side of that is, you know, when I have a win, they're the first they're the first people there championing me and celebrating with me.
Right. You know, for men to be empathic with each other, you know, when a man expresses, you know, his pain around, say, his girlfriend broke up with him or his girlfriend left him hanging and he's heartbroken, for another guy to get angry with him because he's not handling it well, he's just really reflecting his own stuff, because when he had his heart broken, he stuffed it and he said, I'm bigger than this. Screw it. I'm moving on. We had a guy in our group who, the first meeting 25 years ago, his comment was, a woman's best use in life is just for pleasure, and that he'd never had an intelligent conversation with a woman. Well, the other 7 guys looked at him like, you know, I hope this isn't going to be, you know, your constant a rant here, because, you know, that's not what we're here for. Well, at some point we finally got pissed off and said, look, it's okay that you feel this way. You know, we're not judging you, but you're going to have to tell us where this comes from. We want to know. We've waited and you haven't told us. And he stopped and he got quiet. And all of a sudden he started to cry like a baby. And he told the story of getting his heart broken by a woman on a train platform in Europe 30 years before. And she was supposed to meet on the train platform, go away for a weekend. He had the ring to give her to get engaged, and she never showed. And he called and she said she could never wanted to talk to him or see him again. Boom, hung up the phone. He said, I never felt that kind of pain in my life. And I asked, what did you do with that pain? What did you do for yourself? And he said, I stuffed it so deep, I knew it was never going to bother me again. And I said, don't you get that your whole attitude about women comes from that experience? There is no stuffing your feelings. And that's what men need to know. If you stuff it, it's like that whack-a-mole game at the carnival. You may stuff it here, but it's going to come up someplace else. And you can stuff it there, and it's going to keep popping up. It's never going to go away. And men need to stop stuffing their pain, the pain of losing a job, of being unemployed, of getting your heart broken, of watching your kids go the wrong way. I mean, there's all kinds of pain in life. And if you don't have anybody to talk to about it, you're just stuffing it. I had an old friend once, and I asked him, I knew he talked to me, but I didn't think he really talked to anybody else. And he had a hard time sharing his stuff with me, so I was trying to empathize with him, but it was difficult because he didn't share much. And I said, well, who do you talk to on a daily basis? Who are you talking to about your life? He said, well, I know a couple of guys on Wall Street. I said, no, not like portfolio. Talking to about your life. He said, I don't need anybody. He said, I know you got this whole thing with men and friends. I don't need anybody. He said, you know what? Every time I talk to you, you're working on yourself to become a different guy. He said, I'm the same guy I've been for 40 years. And I heard him say that. And I said, did you hear yourself? You're the same guy you've been for 40 years. I mean, what an indictment that was. And I said, don't you see that that's why you're in so much pain and why you don't have any patience for anybody and why you're so unhappy? And I don't know whether he ever got it or not, but it was real clear. So it's hard to empathize with somebody who just can't go to that place of emotional honesty.
Mm-hmm. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of pain and alienation and loneliness in that space. And it sounds like what you're saying is there's fear there, and there's fear and anger and all these, painful emotions. And I guess as being the hero is going to that and kind of confronting it. Is that how you're saying being a hero
Absolutely.
is?
Absolutely. If you want to be, if you want to be a hero, you got to be your own hero first. You can be your wife or girlfriend's hero, your children's hero down the road, but you got to be your own hero first, and that means you got to slay your fear dragon. So yes, a man has to reach out to other men. He has to be willing to reach out to other men and admit, there's parts of my life that just aren't working. I mean, I personally was a guy who had out of control anger. My guys helped me get over it. They helped me identify where it came from and move past it. There aren't many issues that men suffer from that other men, through empathy, can help them move beyond. But a guy who's afraid is frozen and he's going nowhere. He's just standing still and he's sucking up that pain and he's stuffing it, but it's not going away. It's building up. The reason men have anger problems, or the men who do have anger problems have an anger problem, is they keep stuffing their feelings, and then finally it explodes. Well, if they had somebody they could talk to about all their stuff all along, they wouldn't have to explode.
So there's so many different groups. There's like women's group for women specific issues. There's Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have this problem with alcoholism, you have a group. And so what I'm seeing here is and the participants in each of these, they know each other's stories. They know the experience. So they're more attuned to where the other person is. And so it's the same way with men's group, that bringing men together around these issues, they've all experienced this. And so they can really share more deeply each other's experience and contribute to each other's well-being.
Exactly. Somebody asked me recently, I mentioned my group had been meeting uninterrupted for 25 years. We meet every other Thursday for 3 hours. And I mentioned we've been doing this for 25 years, without missing a meeting. And the person I was talking to said, well, haven't you resolved all your issues? And I said to him, doesn't anything new ever come up in your life? Because, yeah, you could resolve the issues, but there's always new stuff. A guy who's 62 years old all of a sudden finds himself unemployed. Well, he was never unemployed before. That's a new issue. A guy who's, however old, going through a divorce, that's a new issue. So men are always experiencing new issues, and what they need is other men with open hearts to help them.
So you're doing like a weekend workshop, kind of an introduction. And so what can you learn like in a weekend about empathy and compassion and in one weekend?
Well, one of the first things you can learn is to listen. And then, as Ken was inferring, you also start to learn that, what you thought was all that stuff that was bad and, that you were ashamed of, virtually every guy in that little circle of yours has something comparable. And that's a huge relief and healing just right there. Because as Ken was saying, we hoard this stuff. We hold it in. And then we project out about either how everyone else is better than us, or we put them down and we disconnect and we're afraid of men. But when we start to hear men tell their stories, and when we start to see men become courageous and being willing to step into a darker place of their existence and just share it. We're not therapists, this is not a therapy group, but just start speaking in a way that, or about things that they haven't spoken about. It's a huge relief. It's a huge relief, obviously, for the man who speaks it, but inevitably, if there isn't every guy in the group, there are at least a few other guys in the group that have almost identical stories or histories. And so as one guy speaks, everyone starts to release or let go or empathize with that man and get a comparable, not just healing, but an education. And yes, so in a broad sense, these groups, you could say, are support groups, but a part of me resists that because so often with support groups, they're oriented around a problem, a behavior, maybe drinking or some kind of disease, where yes, a lot of guys get into a men's group because their life isn't working. But as Ken said, guys stay in these groups not because they need to, in the sense that their life is screwed up. They stay in them because they're fun. We laugh so hard every week. We meet once a week for 4 hours. I mean, we're always laughing, sometimes so much because it hurts. We stay into it because as Ken said, stuff happens and we talk about it in the group and we're through it really quickly. We get support. And what happens over time is these groups start to become like an enhancement group rather than a support group. So these men start to develop richer and deeper lives across the board, not just emotionally and personally, and not just even with their relationships, but professionally. There's guys that have been in the groups that I've been in that were in a dead-end job are now running successful businesses. That are getting graduate degrees, changing entire professions because of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And
I would add to what Owen's saying is I know it's true in Owen's group, and it's certainly been very true in my group, is that we've all become friends. Real friends, authentic friends, unconditional friends. We don't judge each other outside the group either. We don't give each other advice, unsolicited advice at least. A therapist I knew, a friend of mine once said that unsolicited advice was the lowest form of conversation. I think that's true. When people come at me with "you should," I think, whoa, stop. Don't tell me what I should do. Tell me what you did. Because I'm not interested in what you think I should do. I want to hear what you did. Tell me what you did and how that felt. I keep telling men as I talk and do programs like this, you can't think your way through life. You can think your way through your business, your job, but you can't think your way through relationships with men or with women. You got to feel your way, which is a terrifying thought for some men, too many men. But you can't think your way through a relationship with a woman. A woman says, or a guy says, the example I use is because it's so common. The guy says, I don't think we're screwing enough. And the woman says, I'm just not feeling like that. I'm just not in that place. And the guy said, did you hear me? I said, I don't think we're screwing enough. And the woman said, did you hear me? I'm not feeling. And if a guy says what he's thinking in response to what a woman says she's feeling, that's a circular argument that has no end and no conclusion, and it never works. You know, men have to stop trying to think their way through life. They can't do it in every aspect of their lives and relationships, not just with women, but with their children and with their girlfriends and with other men. They got to feel their way through that. You can't function from your brain. So what Owen and I are going to do in this weekend is to connect guys with their hearts, to get them out of their heads and into their bodies. Because you can't feel anything until you're in your body. Because feelings don't come from your head. You know, if you ask 10 guys, give them a topic and say, "What do you feel? How do you feel about that?" I tell you what they think. Say, "No, no, I didn't ask you what you thought. I asked you what you felt." And they'll say the same. "I just told you what I think." They don't know the difference between a thought and a feeling. You know, you can't feel anything in your head. I tell men, the other thing I tell men, and they say, "Well, why do I have to do this kind of work?" I say, if you can't feel your own pain, you're not going to be able to feel anybody else's either, which makes you a basically useless human being in every relationship in your life. You know, if your young son is telling you about a painful experience and you're going to tell him what you think about it, you lost him forever. He's never going to share that with you again. Men have to learn to unplug their brains and get back into their bodies. And that's what this work requires. And that's one of the aspects that Owen and I will be teaching men, is to get out of their heads and into their hearts.
Mm-hmm. So get into what their feelings are. And it's actually, what I was hearing also is that this is like way more than some kind of a support group. This is like a friendship building group, a community building group. And it's kind of like creating a way of being. It's kind of like a life,
Yeah.
a way of being with your life.
Yes, absolutely it is. You know, if you don't have at least, 3 or 4 men and phone numbers that you can call anytime and be guaranteed that they're going to show up at your door, you haven't done your homework, and you need to get into it. You need to get started. And not because you're going to have disasters, we all do, but because you have to have that level of unconditional friendship in your life, that camaraderie. You know, that I was mentored early on in my 40s by an older guy who actually taught me that it was safe to trust other men, because I always had issues with men. I had a crazy, violent father, so I didn't learn trust as a boy. He taught me it was okay to trust other men. And eventually I learned from him it was okay to love other men, that it was a safe, not just a safe experience, it was a great way to take men into your heart. It was okay to take men into your heart and care about them in that way. That's the level of friendship that we're trying to instill in all men. But we're going to start with a couple dozen and see where that goes. But neither Owen and I have ever had any failures with men who really wanted to do the work. The only guys who fail at this are the guys who can't muster the courage to dig into their stuff and share it. Those are the guys who they eliminate the whole practice of friendship because they refuse to get into their hearts, because they're so afraid. I mean, we had a guy who tried to join. He joined our group, came to a couple of meetings, and he was having huge problems with his teenage son. And I said, "Have you ever told your son you love him?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, it might be a good place to start. Why would your son want to share all the things that are going on in his life with somebody who he doesn't even know loves him?" He said, "Well, I can't go to that place." I said, "Yeah, and your son can't either. And he's looking to you to show him that." And he just couldn't get to that place, and it was sad, really sad. He sabotaged himself. And I meet lots of guys who say, "Well, I never told my kids I love them. I just show them." And I say, you know what? That's bullshit. You know, kids need to hear it. They need to hear the words, "I love you. I care about you. I love you deeply. You're in my heart." Kids need to hear that. I don't care what you're showing them. You need to tell them. And so, you know, one of the things I do some father counseling. I was a single dad, so I come from experience. You got to hold your kids in your heart. You can't hold them in your head. It all comes back to the same thing: getting guys out of their heads and into their hearts to eyes with one another.
Well, what I'm seeing from this too is that it's like you're wanting to do more than just create these workshops and these micro communities. It's like you're wanting to spread them. It's almost like you're wanting to create a movement behind this and kind of make it reproducible. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. We want to, have our goal is to have at least 1 million men in a men's group. And yeah, when these groups are free, we'll give you the protocol for free. Ken and I started our groups separately on our own, and we taught ourselves how to do it. And so we can significantly shorten your learning curve. And by coming to one of our weekends, even more significantly shorten your learning curve. And part of the deal is all of us are saying individually and collectively as men, for not just decades, probably centuries, we've been so disconnected, we don't know what we're missing. Mm-hmm. And so often one of the first things that happens when a man comes to one of our events or groups is it's like they just arrived on a new planet. Well, they went from a world that was black and white to one that was color, and everything's so rich. And yes, at first it can be a bit of a shock for a guy, and that's okay. We just ask him, as Ken says, sort of be there in their body, keep breathing or whatever, and participate at your own risk. You can, this is one of our rules, I'm sure one of Ken's, you can say no, you can stop at any point. You're never required to do or say anything that you're not comfortable with. And for a lot of guys, just sitting in the room is a huge act of courage. And then over time, inevitably, these guys start to speak up. So we've had very introverted, shy guys start with our group. And that's all they did in the beginning, was just sit there and watch. But over time, they became a full participant. And it was huge. I mean, several times hearing these guys speak in a way that they've never spoken in their life, even about their pleasure, would bring tears to every guy in the group, because we would see not just the courage that man took in speaking that, but the win that man had in speaking that. And just from that one act of speaking about, maybe it was a pain that they had as a child, or maybe it was a win that they just had at work that they couldn't share. And it was the first time they were able to share it in such a powerful way. You just knew that some part of them just opened up in their life, and that it was never going to close back again. And that's why we got guys volunteering, like my group, flying out from way out in Idaho to come and just help us for free at their own cost, because these guys want other men to experience what we experience on a regular basis, because it's transformed their lives. And it's no mumbo jumbo, it's not weird, it's really just simple communication skills that we believe is instinctual in every man, as is our hero. And when we start experiencing and sharing these behaviors, these skills, we start to learn things that we never got to learn. And this hero that was buried deep down inside of us starts to come out, and our life just gets so much richer, and our relationships so much more fulfilling. And men that never had a purpose in their life start finding not someone else's purpose, say that their parents had for them, but their own purpose. And then they have this community, not just a group, but a community that supports them in living that rich life, which, yes, empathy is such a core skill set that as men, we were shunned from. And then these guys get proud at their ability to communicate and empathize with other people. And, they start going and start teaching these skills to their kids, particularly their boys. And if anything that brings a tear to my eyes is to hear these fathers talk like Ken was talking about with their sons, about telling them how they loved them and accepting their failures and being there with them and taking the time just to be with them. They don't, it's not about doing something. It's just being with them. And they learn that in the group.
I raised my son as a single dad from the time he was a year old. And I was absolutely committed to being the father I never had. And I didn't judge him. I tried not to express opinions about what he was doing. I guided him gently. Mostly, I let him follow his own lead. He has a son now. My grandson is 8 years old. And when I see the two of them together, when my grandson starts to act up, all my son says to him is, now, son, we've talked about this, remember? And my grandson says, yeah, Dad, I remember. And he calms down and they move on. Is that because he's afraid of him? No, it's because my son has raised my grandson with enormous respect, and my grandson respects him too. My son, if they're going to go get something to eat, he'll give them 3 or 4 choices instead of telling them where they're going to go. If they go out to a store to buy some clothes, he'll show them 3 or 4 things, say, what do you like? I mean, he respects my grandson, and my grandson respects him. I've never, ever seen any yelling, any anger, nothing. It's just a beautiful thing to watch. That's how it's supposed to be between men also, who know how to talk to each other, who can respect each other. There's a reason men have shown up for 25 years in my group and 25 years in Owen's group and keep showing up. It's not out of a sense of obligation, I can assure you. No one feels obligated. It's because they want to. And if you don't have an issue that night, often, everybody doesn't, somebody else does. And the sense of friendship and camaraderie and loving and caring is strong enough that you show up because you want to support somebody else. Somebody else needs your empathy, and you better be there to give it to them. No one's ever missed a meeting because there was a playoff basketball game on. That's what DVRs are for. No one's ever missed a meeting for anything except being out of town. That's the only reason not to show up. But as Owen said, the men in our groups, we love being in these groups. I look forward to it. I can't wait, not just to share my stuff, but to help other guys with theirs, and to continue the camaraderie, the friendship. At the end, we always, when the meeting's over, we always hug each other, not in a stiff, meaningless way, but because we really care about each other. We're brothers, and we're trying to get men to see each other as brothers. And this will become a national movement. If it's the last thing Owen and I do before we die, it will become a national movement. It'll be Manhood 2.0, be your own hero. People are going to be talking about, what does it mean to be? What do you mean, be my own hero? What the hell's that all about? Fireman goes in a building and saves somebody, he's a hero. I can't do that. I'm an accountant. How do I do that? Well, you can listen to your wife or girlfriend, really hear her. You can tell her how you're feeling about yourself, about your relationship, about her. You can be honest. You can do the same with your children. That's how you become your own hero, is to be honest with yourself, to live in integrity, to learn how to live your highest ideals. And it's not easy because it has nothing to do with, you can't buy it. Manhood, heroism, it's not for sale in a store. I don't care how much money you have. There's a lot of famous people who are in the media all the time who haven't got a clue what it means to be men, because they're always coming from their egos. Everything they say is about how smart they are, how rich they are, how powerful they are. There's no heroism in that. That's pathetic. I mean, that's just really pathetic. When I hear men talk like that, that's pathetic. When I hear somebody talk about going into a village in Africa and bringing a truck where they can drill for water so the people don't have to walk 8 hours a day to get drinking water, that's a hero. That's a hero, a guy who's actually doing something for other people. That's heroic. A guy who becomes a big brother to a little boy who has no father in his life, that's an act of heroism. Absolutely. That's what being a hero is, and it's within the reach of every single guy. There's nothing strange or unattainable about it. And because if you ask men what they base their self-worth on, most of them will tell you they base it on their net worth. And that's the worst, horrible connection. There's no connection between self-worth and net worth. And if your self-worth is connected to your wallet and your wallet takes a hit, then what are you, less of a man? No, It has nothing to do with your worth as a man. You can be a hero and be unemployed. You can be a hero and be poor. I mean, men have to understand it isn't just about buying stuff. You can't buy empathy. You can't pay people to be empathetic. You know, either you're showing them your empathy and they're giving that back to you in return, or it's not going to happen. So yes, and this is going to be a national movement, and Owen and I are going to lead the charge.
Well, you know, when you were talking, it actually kind of brought tears to my eyes as you were talking about fathers and sons, you know, because I've recounted stories about the relation, you know, why did I kind of get into this work on empathy? And I'll start talking about the deepening connection between my father and myself. And I mean, I feel that sense of connection and how important it is. So, and I think that's a real missing part, you know, for men, is to have a sense of alienation and not feel connected. So,
Thank you.
I think the
Thank
work
you,
that you're
Edwin.
doing is just really wonderful, and I see just the potential for it, how it can really transform. It's something I've been looking at as well in terms of creating um, empathy circles that we're doing online. It's a very similar. I haven't thought of, you know, men's group like you're you know, very specific, and that's a great, you know, way of approaching it. But the one part I was looking at is that the overall vision of the group is not, well, I got my problems and how can I just solve my problems, but it's how do we create an environment and a culture of empathy? You know, how do we create that empathic space where we feel connected, and not only stop there with, you know, our small group and our friends, but how do we transform the whole world culture and make it a kind of an
Right.
active group? And it sounds like that's what you're wanting to do. You want to create small circles. You start with that. You create more circles, and it's really about cultural transformation at its core.
It is. It is. And I think you also touched on something, Edwin, that often doesn't get enough emphasis, which is men want to contribute. And as Ken says, you know, guys come to these meetings every week or every other week, wherever it is for your group, because they also want to contribute. And it's really rewarding to be able to be sitting next to a guy and it's said an empathetic statement to him, like, you know, John, wow, when you talked about or Edwin, when you talked about your father and being a boy, you know, tears came to my eyes, and I felt what it must have felt like for you growing up, and the value that you placed on that relationship, and uh, and then I get to share empathetically the impact that you and your emotions have had on me. That is huge. It's huge for me, it's huge for you, and it's huge for each group, because innate in each man is this desire to contribute. That's part of being a hero. And yeah, as Ken said, it's not necessarily going and finding that building that's burning and going in there and rescuing a child. It's showing up, being that man, as scary as it might be in some moments, and not knowing how to do it, and just showing up and taking those risks and being vulnerable, being empathetic, and just being real to my best of my abilities. And each time that we do this, we get a little better at it. It gets a little easier, and it's hugely rewarding to know that, you know, at the end of one of these meetings, my presence has made a difference in other men's lives. And where can a man say that about his life? Maybe with his family, hopefully with his family, his relationship, but really his unique presence and who he is as a man has made a difference in other men's lives. That is rare. And when men start feeling that, it's like they have a glow. They have a new reason to exist. And that's one of the big reasons that often doesn't get discussed about why men want to share these groups, and why, you know, you're feeling just from our conversation, this, yes, movement that we're speaking about, how we are with these men camp weekends. That's the seed. That's how we're going to germinate this whole movement, so that other men can just go out and do this and have these experiences on a regular basis.
You know, I watched Edwin. I watched you, you know, tear up about your dad, and it made me tear up because I didn't have that experience. And I feel so happy for you, and at the same time, I feel so sad for me. And that's a whole evening of conversation between men, because your experience, sadly, is in the minority. Most of the men I've met over the years, if the tears come, it's because it was the opposite, because the relationship with their fathers was so bad. So to tell you that I actually envy, I was watching I envy when I see men who have such strong feelings for their fathers. I'm enormously envious. I wish I had that. And so what I have is to try and do with my son. But you're a lucky guy, and you're in the very small minority of men. So good for you, and that's something you'll always have for the rest of your life. You'll have that, and you can share that with other men. Because when guys like me who didn't have it hear it, I feel good just to know that there are other guys out there who had something. And I want to hear about it. What's that about? How does that feel? I want to know all about it, because I didn't have that. And I want to know what that means. What does that feel like, to have that connection with your father? So, that's why, these groups are so important. You could share with the guys in my group. I feel so, you get so choked up thinking about your father in such a good way. What a wonderful gift. And it's also terrific that you can feel it enough to show it, and not have to feel like you're filtering it. So I congratulate you for having that experience and for sharing it on an emotional level.
Well, I'm totally sold on the work that you're doing. So I want to support you in any way I can, and do anything I can. And this is, it's not just a 1 hour event, like 1 hour and it's over. I feel like this is just the beginning, and this is an ongoing, a daily, a continuously building, getting involved in the workshops, doing it online, taking leadership position, creating your own groups, and, really make this part of a movement to transform men, the lives of men, so that they feel more connected, as well as transform the whole society and our whole culture, so that we can have a broad culture of empathy and compassion, where people just feel connected. So,
what's the the landing page web address
for my site, or
for the Man Camp weekend?
I showed it on the website. I can show it again here. It's manscorp.org is one of them, and then the other one, actually showing it on the screen here, and the URL is showing. So it's mancampweekends.com.
Good.
So, well, with that, we've gone for about an hour, and I think probably should bring this discussion to a close. I'm glad to, continue it and do more, or maybe do follow-ups or whatever. So,
thank you, Edwin. You're a real good man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your tenacity with bringing out this empathy, because it's, you just keep doing it, which is what it takes. And so the compliments you were paying us really are the compliments I'd pay for you, to just be tenacious and have that courage and that heroic act of being the champion for empathy. And I do agree that there's a huge overlap here. And so, we would love to do more of these and really work together on furthering both our causes.
Yes. In fact, next time, perhaps we'll bring a couple of women who've experienced
great
doing this work. I know my sweetie would love to do this. She would love to talk about what the work has meant in our relationship. The work that I've done with men how it's translated to my relationship. So there's definitely other shows we could do with you, and I'd appreciate that.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much, and until that time, I'll say goodbye, and very grateful for the work you're doing. I actually feel very good. I feel very warm and centered or something. So it's just been a pleasure. It's like, this is great.
Thank you, Edwin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day, Edwin.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.